morning. I hope you're doing well today. Welcome to Thursday of this week. Gosh, guys, I lose track. Thursday, March 26th. And so we are back onto area. That's what we're going to be looking at and working with today. And so you can continue on your area notes from the other day. We're going to look at a few of them. We're not necessarily going to look at as many shapes, but we still need to know that area equation. Please make sure you're checking in all the time. There's still some of you, I got to remind you every day, check in and keep watching this video to get your points. So let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. We thank you that the last few days have been a little bit nicer, and it looks like our weather is going to be pretty nice today. Please be with us as we go through our days. Help us to work hard at school. Help us to relax as we're at home while still trying to separate those two things at one time. And please be with us as today is a good opportunity maybe to get out and get some work done or get some exercise outside. Please be with anybody who is sick. Help to keep them safe and healthy and bring them back to full health. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, so we have been talking about area, and we know the area of different shapes, but we need to bring that in with similarity. So there was one time before we left school where I was talking about, and I turned around and on the board, I drew like a real quick picture, it wasn't great, of the basketball court. And I said, here's our plan. I said, if I wanted to, I could make that to scale, which means it's similar to the actual basketball court in our gym. Like I could write, you know, the Lutheran East or the Lou or Falcons or, you know, whatever we have written around the side. I could draw the blue lines. But what I would need to do is go to the gym and measure how long it was and see how long it was and draw it to scale. That's what you call it sometimes when you draw it to scale. So we're going to look at two different shapes here in the next second. And they're both rectangles. They're drawn to scale to each other. And we're going to figure out a few things about them. So I've got a few things already pre-written on my paper. I would like you to write those down as well. So go ahead and pause your video if you need to. I'm going to take a quick sip of coffee as you're doing this. All right. So we have these two rectangles, and they're different sizes. You can tell that. They're different lengths. You can tell that. It says that. So let's go ahead and figure out, how do you find the area of a rectangle again? Very good, thank you. Length times width. So since we have length times width or base times height, I heard both of those. We would do 4 times 2. Guys, I didn't put a unit on this one, but let's pretend it's feet. So what's 4 times 2? So we get 8 feet squared. Sorry, my pen wasn't working at first. So we get 8 feet squared for the small one. Let's go ahead to the large one. We'll still pretend it's in feet since I forgot to write feet. Looks like on most of mine I forgot units. Today, 4 times 8 is 32. And that would be 32 feet squared. All right. So we have those two bits of information. Area of the small is 8 feet squared. Area of the big is 32 feet squared. Now, you know, 8 gets multiplied by something to get to 32. But I want to look at something else. Would you look up here and tell me, like, if I did 4 times what would equal 8 and 2 times what would equal 4? Yeah, we don't get to use the same thing for area, and I'll kind of explain why here. So there's 2 things we could say. Our proportion is either 1/2 or 2. Technically 2 to 1. It depends if you're looking like this way or this way, this way or this way. And I know I said that kind of as the same time as it's pointing. If you start with this one, your proportion would be half of this one. If you start with the large one, your proportion is double the small one, or 2/1. So first of all, in a minute or two, we're going to have to be careful about what way that is written on a different piece of paper when we don't get to see the picture. But I got to tell you something. A lot of people want to look right here and say, oh, look, 4 times 2 equals 8, so I got to take 8 times 2 to get the area. What happens if you take 8 times 2? You do not get 32. Also, what happens if you take half of 32? You don't get 8. Okay? You cannot just look at the scale right here and know the scale from this, or the proportion or the ratio from this. Those three are all the same, and automatically know what to do right here. That is because area is length times width. That actually means we would have to do this twice, because we would take half of the 4 and half of the 8, or we would take 2 of the 4. So I have a question for you. Look down here. What's 1/2 times 1/2? Because what if I took 2 of those? Like, what if I had to do it both for the height and the length? 1/2 times 1/2 would actually be 1/4. Would you please tell me what 1/4 of 32 is? It's 8. This side, what is 2 times 2? 4. And what's 8 times 4? So guys, it looks like our pattern has a little bit to do with the original proportion, but we actually have to do something to it. Would you like to tell me, we did this the other day, what happens, what do you really call it when you take half times half? Don't say fourth. 1/2 times 1/2. You could say the same word if you say 2 times 2 is what? Oh, so you can't say 4 and fourth. 2 times 2 happens to be 2 squared. 1/2 times 1/2 happens to be 1/2 squared. So guys, what we're going to do on the next few papers is going to look at the ratio and proportion and see if we can figure out the ratio and proportion to help us do something. But you got to take the ratio and proportion and square it. All right? And so let's look at our next paper. Well, pause. And guys, now that you have paused, we have a rectangle again. So what's 10 times 15? Actually, that one's pretty easy. I did this drawing backwards for some reason compared to the other one. I did the big one first. Let's pretend on this paper the unit is inches. Just that way we can switch up things. And on the other one, I have 9 times 6. What's 9 times 6? So that would be 54. And again, we notice that it's a really weird proportion or ratio, like it's not just doubled or different things like that. But if you look at the same thing, this is not just doubled or whatever. Last time it was doubled, so that was an easy one for us. I already gave us the hint, so we should be good. What you're going to do first to figure out your proportion or ratio is actually write a ratio between these two. And it doesn't really matter if you go small to big or big to small. So I'm going to write both of them. 6 over 10. Uh-oh, do we like 6 over 10? I'm already going to simplify that one. 6 over 10 would be 3 over 5, which means if I'd go 10 to 6, it would reduce and I would get 5/3. So please notice you know those two things, and I'll tell you the hint about when you want to use them and when you want to use which one. And so if you notice here too, our proportion is not something that's necessarily great, but that's okay. What did I have to do on my other paper? I couldn't just take the proportion. I had to square it, okay? I had to square it. So when I'm dealing with the areas, I'm going to be squaring that ratio or proportion. When I'm dealing with the areas, I'm going to be squaring that ratio or proportion. Now, something else I would like to tell you. This number right here is a fraction that will be less than 1. That means if I multiply something like that by this, it will get smaller. So I have to multiply this on the bigger area. This number is going to be bigger than 1. That means it's going to make our answer bigger. So I'm going to use this one when I know the area of the small. So would you please pick up a calculator? Right here, we know that our area of our big, we found it, is 150. So would you please type 150 in your calculator? Now, if you're using a calculator like this, you need to put an open parentheses right now. If you're using an iPhone, I'm not quite sure the order you would have to type that in. I would maybe recommend opening up Desmos. And same thing, I would type 150 times and then type the open parentheses on Desmos. right here, since this is our big one, we need to use our small fraction. Here's the weird thing. The big area has to get matched up with the small fraction. And remember, these two fractions are the same. They're just flipped over. One of those fractions will always be bigger. One of those fractions will always be smaller. So we need to pick this smaller fraction, which was 3/5. On this calculator to get 3/5, on Desmos to get 3/5, just use your division symbol. But then remember to do it, because to actually get from the big to the small and get my answer, I have to square that value. So there should be a button on your calculator that says squared. So right now on my calculator, I know it's very hard to read on the screen, says 150 times parentheses 3 divided by 5, close parentheses squared. If I hit enter, I hope you get 54. I did. I hope you do too. But if you notice, that gives us the area of the small. So now let's work backwards. I'll hold my paper over here. Let's pretend we only had the small. If we only had the small, we would have 54. So on your calculator, type 54. And then we're going to multiply that by this fraction, but we need to put it in parentheses, so please put parentheses. Since I'm working with the small area, I need the bigger fraction. So I'm going to do 3/5. Excuse me, I misspoke. I typed in 5/3. That's bigger. And I'm going to square it. And if I hit enter, I get 150. Which really means I am not going to need to do all of this work. All right? So here's one more example with pictures. Thank you for copying that down. If you didn't copy it down, you might want to review your video a little bit, rewind it, and do that. So this is a triangle. Our equation would be a little bit different, but that's not a big deal. I'm actually going to do something here that's kind of weird. I'm going to pretend I don't want to find the area of the small. I'm only going to find the area of the big. So we're going to take 1/2 times 42 times 35. The area of my big shape is 735. And again, guys, since I've been forgetting units, let's do centimeters squared on this one just to switch it up. Now, we're not going to type in the area of our small yet. We're going to do that in just a minute, but we're going to try this pattern we've been doing the last few minutes to do that. Now, our ratio right here could probably be reduced, but I'm going to do 20/35. That's what I'm going to do first. And guys, you're right, 20/35 can be reduced. 20 and 35 are both factors of 5, and so we would get 4/7. So the ratio proportion I would like you to think about is 4/7. So would you agree 735 is the area of my big? That means I want the small fraction to get the small area. Do you think I want to use 4/7 or 7/4? Which one is smaller than 1? Oh yeah, 4/7 is smaller than 1. And so I'm going to take my area of the big. I'm going to write this down too, guys, so you can see it on paper. That's 735 centimeters squared. We don't have to write the units on our calculator, though. I'm going to take the smaller of the ratios, which would be 4/7, and I'm going to square it. So on my calculator, I'm going to do 735 times, and then my parentheses, open parentheses for that, 4/7, I square it, and it looks like my answer for my small one, which we had not found yet, was supposed to be 240. Again, our units was centimeters squared, so it would still be centimeters squared. So let's check it right here, this small one. We would have to do 20 times 24 times 1/2. I know I said a little bit out of order that time. Guess what my calculator said when I did 1/2 times 20 times 24? I got 240. So guys, tonight on your homework, by the way, you might want to put a little note right now. I think the time is about 14:30. It could be a little bit off. That's what my time is showing me right now. You might want to put a little note in your notes that says go to 14:30. So your homework tonight is going to look more like the paper I'm about to show you. Please make sure you're careful to read the directions because it doesn't exactly show up like this. But 2 examples like your homework tonight. This first one, you are going to be given, there's no pictures. Notice there's no pictures. you're going to be given the ratio. Go ahead and write down that ratio or proportion. You are either going to be given the area of the big, notice this top example I gave you, area of the big, just real quick, I'll move again, or the area of the small. Please remember, if you are going from big to small, you need a smaller fraction. Is this a small fraction? 3 over 8 is smaller than 8 over 3. Those are the only two you have to compare, either 3 over 8 or 8 over 3. So since this is big, we need the small fraction. I'm going to remind you of that right here. That's why I said put down in your notes to go back to 1430 for sure. You're going to need the small fraction. I did not know why I put an S on that. You're going to need a small fraction, which means you need to pick 3 over 8. But don't forget, since we're finding area, we're supposed to square. So our small fraction would be 3/8 squared. Notice right here, our number is given. That number that is given is 3,456 times, open parentheses, 3/8, close parentheses. Make sure you get that squared on there. Hit enter. So your answer for your homework tonight would say area of small. And the calculator is telling me 486. And guys, on this one, since it was like the homework, I made sure to put, since this says centimeters squared, this would be centimeters squared. The area of your small would be 486 centimeters squared. And you know what? The truth of the matter is, we don't even care what shape this is. I know I had pictures before to help us visualize it, but it doesn't even matter what shape this is. All right, so look at the bottom one. Go ahead and write down that example. All right, our ratio or proportion is 3/5. Remember, that's a small fraction. We might need to do the other one. Are we given the small area or the big area? Since we're given a small area, I need the big fraction. And remember, I'm not just making up my own fraction. I'm going to look at the fraction that was given to us, and there's two options. Either 3 over 5 or 5 over 3. One of those two is bigger. And so I'm going to use 5 over 3. Even though it gave me 3/5, I've got to use 5/3 because I got to use my own brain to figure out, do I use the fraction they give me or do I flip it around? Please be careful of that every single time. Every time, look at the fraction and say, am I going big to small? Because if I'm going big to small, I need the small fraction. If I'm going small to big, I need the big fraction. But of course, since we're doing area, I would need to square that. So that means on my calculator, I'm going to take the area they already gave me, which is 63. And then I'm going to multiply it by the fraction I figured out was the bigger fraction, which is 5/3. But of course, I got to square it. Please don't forget to hit squared on your calculator. And so it looks like my answer for my paper would say area of big equals 175. And since it's 175, excuse me, since this was 63 inches squared, my answer would be 175 inches squared. So once again, that's all that we have for today. Guys, I got all the way to the end of the video and I didn't tell you yet, okay? And so what I would like to know today is next week, we're probably going to have to, I know we haven't had any quiz. We've been doing those online little like example games and stuff like that. Next week, we're probably going to have a test. So your homework, your homework is going to be assigned with this video too, but your like little response in order to my video is, have you heard from other teachers yet? Like what day is your test in other classes? Because guys, what I'm thinking, we're first period. I know a lot of you work on this first period, but some of you don't. I got to try to reach out because not everybody is still getting back to me. What day do you think would work well to sort of have a test on all of this stuff? Obviously, we have to review. So Friday, we can start to review. Monday, maybe review. But the rest of the days next week, and remember, we moved spring break back a few days just because we weren't sure what was going on with everything. And so the very last day of school before our 2-week spring break is next Friday. So let's figure out a day. So that is your response for me. Email me and tell me if there's any other days yet that you know you have tests. And Therefore, what day would not necessarily work for a test in geometry class? We know we can't always avoid it. And if there would maybe be a good time for the test, because I'm probably going to do it where it's for a certain time, or like at this certain time, or please log on at this time. Makes sense? All right, have a good day, guys. I miss seeing you all the time, and I hope you're doing well. Have a great Thursday. Please don't be afraid to reach out and talk to me. Okay, bye.